I want to welcome everybody. I'm Ann Ferguson. I'm the MC for this event. I'm a retired professor from UMass in philosophy and women's studies. A longtime feminist, peace and social justice activist. I'm pretty old and I've been doing this since the 60s. So, but we shall overcome. I will be your MC. I'm going to introduce the speakers. I represent the organizing committee for this coalitional event sponsored by FCCPR, which is Franklin County Continuing the Political Revolution. And we have many co-sponsors. But before I describe our organizations and the program, I want to make some general announcements. First, very important, bathroom. Out the door, turn left, just past the lockers. There's one quite accessible stall. Secondly, thank you so much to the Raging Grannies for singing the opening songs. But you will hear them around town if you look for them at all these kind of social justice events. There are several sign-up sheets on clipboards at the table by the door. So please put your name and contact on it if you want to receive further information about FCCPR and further events and issues we are working on that connect to the themes of this rally for reproductive justice. We also have some buttons and cards and other material that's relevant to the fight for reproductive rights and justice at that table. Also, there are program flyers that list the speakers and descriptions on one side, along with some political things to do. And also lists some of the aspects of the Republican Project 2025 on the other. So there's also some sheets with some chants we may use. However, we can't use any chants after 12:30, we've been told, because there's going to be an event in the other room. So we'll see how that goes. There are time limits. Okay, this is important. We need to be out of the space by 1:30 at the latest. Hopefully we will. We have a lot of speakers, so we want to end the rally by 1:15 at the absolute latest because we need just a little time to schmooze and clean up. So we're going to give each speaker 5 minutes, although our keynote speaker will get 7. And I will really have to be a strict school marm. I've got a kitchen timer that marks 5 minutes with a ding. That's when your cookies are due out of the oven. And so I will then give the speakers an additional minute after that, so that to wrap up. This is to be fair to all the speakers and get out here in time. So, and if anyone did park at the funeral hall next door, please don't do that. That's not what we are asked to do. This rally is called Bigger Than Dobbs, the War on Women and Democracy. I want to tell you more about our group and the Reproductive Justice Task Force that's helped to organize this rally. And I also want to mention the other co-sponsors of the rally. But before I do that, let me explain why the speakers and others of us are wearing white and green, and these green sashes at this rally. So we're wearing white to honor the 19th and early 20th century U.S. suffragists who won women the constitutional right to vote. The struggle was started by women abolitionists against slavery who were not allowed to speak in public to oppose slavery. The campaign to make women full citizens has only been partially successful up to the present because although white women won the vote in 1920, U.S. racial segregationists have continued to deny many women and people of color the vote by various shenanigans, including physical intimidation and racial gerrymandering of electoral districts. And the ERA was never ratified. So feminists and anti-racists, we have much more to do to protect even our democratic right to vote, let alone our other democratic rights. Okay, so what about the sashes? Well, we're wearing sashes, ribbons, and scarves. And I just have to take a minute to get my scarf out. Okay. Sashes, ribbons, and scarves that are green in solidarity with the global green wave movement to support abortion rights and to oppose violence against women. This started in Latin America. When I was in Argentina, big Encuentro there, I got this sash, the scarf, from the National Campaign for the Right to Abortion, Illegal, Safe, and Free Abortion. And what it says in Spanish is their aim is sex education to decide, contraception to not abort, and abortion not to die. So those are our mottos too. So the main organizer and sponsor of this event is FCCPR. We're a local group established in 2016 to promote democracy and progressive politics. We're also part of the nationwide progressive political organization called Indivisible. Indivisible was created in 2016 to save American democracy and resume the project of creating a humane America that is more like social democracy than corporate plutocracy. It was formed after Trump was elected to organize local political actions to challenge MAGA Republican politics, both through electoral politics and events and demonstrations at town halls and other venues. So Indivisible is sponsoring rallies and standouts all around the country on this weekend of June 22nd to 24th to mark the second anniversary of the Supreme Court Dobbs decision, which took away the constitutional right of women to abortion. Our rally here in Greenfield is a part of 16 events at 13 locations in Massachusetts. A lot of us. Yes. to challenge and the Feminist Action Team of Mass Individual co-sponsored these and helped organize them throughout the state. So let me tell you a little bit about FCC, our Reproductive Justice Task Force. We created this task force after the Supreme Court Dobbs decision in 2022. And we are inspired by the concept and history of reproductive justice and activism that was created by Black feminists in 1994. We support the definition of reproductive justice offered by Sister Song on their website, quoting, "Reproductive justice is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities." Our RJ Task Force works together with other sister organizations in the River Valley of Western Mass and beyond to support reproductive justice for women and parents through legislative action, informational campaigns, political demonstrations, and fundraising to support access to abortions to all that need them. We've also advocating for educational and social support, sex education, contraceptive access, and medical care necessary for reproductive justice for all, regardless of income or race, as well as for the rights of working parents to paid parental leave, child care, and other social supports like housing, schooling, adequate income necessary to raise healthy children. Otherwise, when we think about reproductive justice, it includes just about all of the rights that, that social democrats and progressives stand for. So we have a listserv for those interested in reproductive issues, and we meet regularly on Zoom. So if you want more information about us, please sign up at the table on the sign-up sheets, or you can look at us up at www.sccpr.us on our Reproductive Justice Task Force tab. Now let me talk about our co-sponsors. It takes a huge village to defend our democracy. Besides the Mass Indivisible Feminist Action Team, our main co-sponsors for the rally who helped us organize it are the Trap Rock Center for Peace and Justice. And yes, and the Western Mass Code Pink Women for Peace. Some of our other co-sponsors are represented by speakers on the program. They include the Western Mass Jewish Voice for Peace, the Western Mass Area Labor Federation, and the River Valley Democratic Socialist Union. So finally, before I get to the speakers, what's our rally about? Well, the title, as I said, is bigger than Dobbs, the War on Women and Democracy. Although we're feminists who oppose the Supreme Court Dobbs decision, we see that decision as only one part of a broader reactionary plan, not only to wage war on women, to deny us our bodily sovereignty, but also an overall attack on U.S. democracy. The project is bigger than Dobbs. Connects to a MAGA Republican plan called Project 2025, some of whose aims are stated on our program flyer. This plan aims to take over our government if Trump wins the presidency. It will have consequences not only for women, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans folks, but also for workers, immigrants, and those working to combat climate change, to demand social justice at home. Increasing state repression of protests is a present worrying trend in the U.S. and also connects to war on humanity, but leaves many U.S. citizens unable to influence the decisions of their own government and the ongoing genocide in our neighbor Gaza, as well as politics that affect our lives at home. We are holding this rally to increase public awareness of how wars, the present Supreme Court, and reactionary anti-democratic politics are all part of wars on most of us, and particularly on women in a multitude of ways. So let me now introduce you to our keynote speaker, Pat Hines, from the Trap-Rock Center for Peace and Justice. She will say more about these things. Lesbian feminist, and she's a board member of the Trap-Rock Center for Peace and Justice, a retired professor of environmental health and environmental justice, writer of many books, co-founder of Bread and Roses, the feminist restaurant and cultural center in Cambridge.
The war on women is everywhere, in the home, locally, nationally, and globally. Take the recent report from NELCLI here in Franklin County. In this past year, they served 1,933 women survivors of mainly male sexual and physical violence. In the 2018 National Sexual Violence Resource Center, they published that 81% of women reported experiencing some form of sexual harassment and/or sexual violence. Further, the majority of violence against women is perpetrated, as we all know, by male intimate partners and acquaintances. There are a myriad of other misogynist wars on women worldwide, including military wars, sex trafficking and prostitution, pornography, the theft of female and lesbian sexual identity by some in the trans movement, female genital mutilation, child marriage, etc. But none at this moment so intensive as Israel and the United States' genocidal war on Gaza. 70% of those killed are women and children. Israel's bombing of hospitals with maternity wards, the starvation of pregnant and breastfeeding women, and the record acute malnutrition among newborns and young children speak loud and clear. End Palestinian women's potential to give life and the survival of Palestinian babies and children. How cruelly ironic that as the U.S. weapons murder life in Gaza and elsewhere in the world with impunity, 14 U.S. states have criminalized women's choice of abortion as murder, not even allowing abortion for the hateful acts of rape and incest. 6 more states have generated similar limits. There were 65,000 rape-related pregnancies between July 2022 and January 2024 in those states, banning or putting extreme limits on abortion post-Dobbs. Today, a majority of U.S. adults, and that's from every religion, ethnicity, moderate and liberal Republicans, and a vast majority of Democrats, women and men, agree that abortion should be legal. Thus, the end of Roe v. Wade in the 2022 Dobbs Supreme Court decision is both a war on women and a war on democracy, given that the will of the majority of U.S. citizens does not prevail nor influence government policy. According to The Economist, the United States ranks among flawed democracies. Another recent comprehensive study of democracies worldwide concluded that only 15% of people globally live in places where women and lower income groups have at least somewhat equal access to power. The US, of course, is not one of them. What fuels the control of women's bodies in our country? It is misogyny and injustice. After all, there is no comparable moral or medical control of men's bodies. Yet the moralistic urgency to preserve life in the womb evaporates once a poor child is born. 1 in 6 children in this country lives in poverty, the highest rate of all industrial countries. 4 million youth are homeless. Clearly, controlling a woman's right to her own body is not about the unborn's right to life. Otherwise, all kinds of social legislation for maternal and child health, adequate housing, a living wage, and well-funded education would accompany legislation criminalizing abortion. And regarding women's loss of economic democracy, women have higher rates of poverty than men, with women of color having the highest. And why? For at least 3 reasons. First, domestic violence causes women victims to lose altogether an average of 8 million days of paid work per year, and it is a strong factor in women's homelessness. Second, women's reproductive labor, giving birth, breastfeeding, and caring for children is not compensated with free childcare and paid parental leave in the United States, unlike all other industrial countries. Thus, women who give birth are cheated of savings, pensions, and Social Security. So no surprise that the greatest risk for being poor in old age is having been a mother. More women than men struggle to cover everyday expenses due to the gender wage gap, which has remained stagnant for 20 years at 82%, a significant factor contributing to the substantial disparity in poverty rates between women and men aged 75 and older. This is stunning to me. Even for college graduates in 2024, the same economic inequality persists. Male college graduates have been hired at an average slightly above $30 per hour. Women college graduates at slightly over $25 per hour. A wage inequality of 82%, the same gap for 20 years, that will follow these women college graduates all their working lives. Now, salary, as we all know, is symbolic of one's worth. Why are women worth 82% of men in the workplace? So I'll finish with 2 oppositional realities. More lives were lost in the 20th century through violence against women in all its forms in the United States than during all 20th century wars and civil strife. Yet, while thousands of monuments throughout the United States honor those who lost their lives for their country in war, only one, and the first of its kind, is currently still being planned, this has been for years, for women who lost their lives giving birth to the country's children. Isn't that an incredible disparity? The counterpoint reality is that feminist revolutions to gain human rights and equality for women, however incomplete that goal remains, have freed and saved millions of women and girls' lives without weapons, without fists, and without a drop of blood spilled. Women have more than a lot that men can learn from. Men commit 90% of homicides and almost all sexual violence. Men are the primary wagers of war. Were our skills, our social and intellectual intelligence, and our wisdom valued and welcomed in all places of social and political decision-making, from home to national governments and the UN, the world might get a chance at global peace and restoring our beautiful planet. Thank you.
Abortion is healthcare. Healthcare is a right. 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 He's a constitutional attorney and the co-founder and president of Free Speech for People, which is a national nonprofit organization defending democracy and our constitution across the country. Serves as a leading force in the nation, fighting to protect our right to vote in our elections, and challenging big money in politics and unchecked corporate power, and confronting corruption in our government, including now in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you to SCCPR for hosting this event, and all the other co-sponsors, and for all of you coming out today for this critical discussion about our democracy. Democracy is under attack. Democracy is under attack by forces that do not believe in an expanded electorate, that do not believe in a multiracial democracy, that do not believe that all who are eligible ought to be able to vote, that do not believe in the promise of political equality for all. At Free Speech for People, the organization I direct, we are engaged in fights today in courts across this country, challenging voter suppression and voter intimidation. We're headed to trial in mid-July in Colorado against a QAnon-inspired extremist group that has been going door to door with an illegal voter intimidation campaign fueled by the big lie that there was somehow massive fraud in the 2020 election, none of which is true. We're in court at the end of July in New Hampshire against those who conspired together to send thousands of robocalls to New Hampshire Democratic voters on the eve of the New Hampshire presidential primary in January with an AI, artificial intelligence-generated fake voice of President Joe Biden, telling them not to vote on the primary day, to save their vote for the general election. This, too, is voter intimidation, voter coercion, prohibited by Section B of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we're in court in Arizona and Texas, challenging voter suppression laws that were enacted by their state legislatures after the 2020 election, fueled again by the big lie of massive fraud, but designed, intentionally designed, to suppress the vote, particularly of those traditionally disenfranchised. Democracy is also under attack by a corrupt United States Supreme Court. Both corruption through millions of dollars and gifts flowing to certain justices without any disclosure whatsoever, but also the corruption of a fraudulent theory of originalism, which was applied corruptly with respect to decision. But when we look at that argument of originalism, we see that those same justices choose not to apply it when it comes to a matter that they think politically ought to go the other way. Trump v. Anderson is a great example of this. That's the case the Supreme Court decided just a few months ago, coming out of the state of Colorado, where Colorado, like Illinois, like Maine, had decided that Donald Trump was disqualified from appearing under the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which makes clear that if you have taken an oath of office and then engaged in insurrection, you're forever barred from holding public office again. But 5 of those right-wing members of the court, all men, chose to find an exception. Doesn't exist in the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, doesn't exist in the text, doesn't exist from a question of originalism, but they decided to invent an exception that requires Congress first to pass a law to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. This is a form of corruption. And finally, there is the corruption of certain justices who have a clear conflict of interest and yet are continuing to sit on cases dealing with Donald Trump. One justice, Justice Alito, flying insurrectionist flags outside his home. Another justice, whose wife, Ginny Thomas, was engaged in the Stop the Steal movement, was engaged in trying to overturn the 2020 election. These 2 justices have refused to recuse themselves from cases pending before this court that they're about to decide this coming week, most likely, dealing with Donald Trump's claim of immunity from any crimes he committed as President of the United States, dealing with holding insurrectionists accountable, including Donald Trump. This is a form of corruption as well. And so we've launched a campaign at Free Speech for People called SCOTUS Reform Now. Our website is scotusreformnow.org. We're demanding an investigation by the Senate Judiciary Committee, full-scale investigation of this corruption at the Supreme Court, subpoena Justice Alito, subpoena Martha Annalino, subpoena Justice Roberts, subpoena Justice Thomas, subpoena Ginny Thomas, put them under oath, and hold this investigation for the American people. That's number one. Number two is we want to see the United States Supreme Court expanded. The Judiciary Act of 2021 calls for 4 new seats. You know, the Supreme Court is not decided, there's nothing in the Constitution that says it has to be only 9 justices. In fact, it used to be 6. There's nothing that requires that number 9. And the court has grown over the years in terms of the docket, in terms of what's required, but also to restore balance and integrity to this court, we must have 4 new seats, expand the Supreme Court. Number 3, there ought to be ethics reform passed by the United States Congress that makes clear that the justices have the same standard as every other federal judge. Every other federal judge has to follow code of ethics, so too must Supreme Court justices. And number 4, Congress must begin impeachment proceedings against Justice Alito, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Thomas. It's time to hold them accountable for their abuses of power. Democracy's under attack, but we can fight back. We can stand up for the right to vote. We can stand up for our freedoms. We can stand up for a Supreme Court free of corruption. And we can stand up for the promise of political equality for all. Democracy's under attack. We can fight back. Thank you very much.
Democracy is under attack. We can fight back. Democracy is under attack. We can fight back. They say theocracy. We say democracy. They say theocracy. We say democracy. They say autocracy. We say democracy. They say autocracy. We say democracy. So now I'm introducing Kaya Jackson, they, them, who is a core organizer with Jewish Voice for Peace of Western Mass. They are also a healing arts facilitator, storyteller, and movement chaplain who is grateful to call Great Falls their home.
Hello. That's better for me. So before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to invite us to check in with our own bodies, our own breath. How are you showing up to this space today? What are you longing for? Perhaps some of us have come here today as an ally or as an organizer. Perhaps some of us have come here today bearing our own wounds in relation to our bodies, our agency, and our access to health care and reproductive justice. Many of us know the ache of being unheard deep in our bones, and many of us also know the power of speaking about that which we know to be true. I was honored to be invited to speak with you today about the connection between reproductive justice and the current devastation in Gaza. As a local organizer with Jewish Voice for Peace of Western Mass, I have been working closely with local Jews, Palestinians, and organizers of many backgrounds and many lived experiences to call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, an arms embargo of Israel, and an end to the relentless genocide of the Palestinian people. This genocide in Gaza has left no civilian untouched, and yet it is important for us to take some time today to really consider the lived realities of many women, caregivers, and womb bearers on the ground. Despite the ongoing censorship of Palestinian voices and unprecedented attacks on journalists in Gaza, many of us have still seen the images of war-torn neighborhoods, the apocalyptic rubble where homes once stood, the agonized faces of family members mourning their many children and beloveds, the countless images that you will find at your fingertips on your phone if you are looking. As feminists, we must keep looking, and we must learn to discuss this dire situation as a women's issue, as a reproductive health issue, as a queer and LGBTQ+ issue, as a disability justice issue, and as a human rights issue, and as an environmental justice issue, and as a moral issue of our times. We must also look and listen for the stories that cannot be so readily depicted. We must imagine what it is like to menstruate without any access to menstrual products. We must imagine the choice between bleeding into one's only dress or searching for another option, a piece of cloth or fallen tent that cannot be washed. We must imagine what it is to watch our own belly expand as we wait another week and then another month for food and water that never comes. We must imagine for a moment what it feels like to harbor life in an occupation intent on death, and the sensations of chronic grief and chronic stress and chronic terror in our body. We must imagine the complete and total loss of choice, whether because birth control was far from the realm of possibility or because the conditions themselves cannot be made to support life. We must imagine so much more than any number can convey about infant mortality, stress-induced miscarriages, stillbirths, premature babies, and malnourished children. We must imagine, until we know deep in our bones, that each of these bodies, like our body, is a whole universe of longing and need, and desire, and pain, and hope. And we must imagine that we cannot look away. The reproductive injustice that is taking shape in countless ways before our eyes and beyond our sight is not only a byproduct of this horrific war, it is an expression of an intentional targeting of Palestinian bodies, Palestinian lives, and Palestinian society. As we continue to work steadfastly towards securing our own rights to contraception, abortion, and healthcare in this country, we must never forget the many expressions of reproductive injustice taking shape both locally and globally. We must continue to ask ourselves whose voice is not being heard or centered within our very own communities, our own organizations, and our own movements. And we must never forget the wise words of Audre Lorde. I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. May we find our strength and our freedom together and leave no one behind. Thank you.
No more wars. 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 Now I'm going to introduce Dave got his start in the labor movement organizing a union at Holyoke Wire and Cable Company, and he also went on then to become for the United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers of America, UE, and he retired then after 38 years of building rank and file Democratic unions. Dave represents FCCPR and also the Western Mass Area Labor Federation.
Everybody. Just for a little clarification, I don't represent the Western Mass Federation of Labor, but that's okay, we're friends. I would urge everyone to go to the website and read Project 2025, Republican Plan. It sits on project2025.org. You probably won't read all 800 pages of it, but it's good to take a good look at it and see what they're planning. You'll be amazed at the depth that they have for the plans in the first 180 days after the presidential election to convert this government and country. I would say that it reflects the evolution of right-wing politics in this country. It's a merger of classic reactionary big business politics along with the social right-wing politics that's mainly fueled by small business people who are aligned with the Tea Party movement and the Christian nationalist movement. And of course, in this country, a lot of that social movement is based on extreme racism and anti-women politics. And this isn't to say that the big business reactionaries were pro-women or anti-racist, but usually their politics was confined to they would hire women and minorities as long as they could pay them less money. It's a detailed plan, this Project 2025, to give corporations unfettered rule to increase profits and deny all rights to the working class. It is a plan to roll back the clock on advances, however incomplete, that affect minorities and women. For example, in the labor section of Project 2025, it details every agency and law that collects data on racial and sexual composition. It would stop and outlaw all collection of such data. What does that mean? Without that data, you cannot show discrimination on hiring on the basis of race or sex. You cannot show discrimination in housing. You cannot show discrimination in job distribution or advancement or anything else. And it's interesting it comes in the labor section of their attacks because they recognize that unions have been a main force in eliminating discrimination in the workplace. Just to give you an example of what they said, eliminate EEO data collection. The Equal Opportunity Commission collects data on employment statistics based on race, ethnicity, and which data can be used to support a charge of discrimination under disparate impact theory. Then another point is eliminate disparate impact theory. What does that mean? It means under disparate impact theory, the discriminatory motive or intent is irrelevant. The outcome is what matters. But all workplaces have discrimination in them. So I'll give you a quick example of what this means. When the Republicans were in power and would deal with the National Labor Relations Board, we filed a charge against a person who was fired for organizing a union, illegal under the law. This is a person who had a perfect work record, only got disciplined by his employer when he came out publicly for the union and was eventually fired. So we filed a complaint. The board said to us, well, we need proof. We said, well, here's the proof. 20 years of a perfect work record, comes out for the union, gets 5 warnings in the next couple of weeks, and is terminated. They said, well, no, what we need for proof is a letter, a signed letter from the employer saying that this is their plan, to fire this person for being for the union. Well, we said, well, how do we get that letter? Well, we can't, I said, will you defend us when we go raid the boss's office looking for a letter? Well, of course not, they're not going to do that, right? But that's their intent, to make everything like that. Unless you have the absolute smoking gun, you cannot, you cannot deal with it. Now I'll try and go quick in here. So I want to say real quickly, the Republicans have billionaires and large corporations to fund their think tanks. And they have the Republican Party to carry out their plan. We don't have that. We have think tanks, but we don't have a reliable political vehicle to carry out our plan for a better country. The Democratic Party on the whole might be pro-choice, but it's pro-corporate and pro-war, and on a million other things we disagree with. So this election appears to be the choice between a fascist politician and a pro-corporate war politician. I would say that it's really, we're making the choice under what conditions are we going to struggle for a better country and a better world? Under a fascist dictatorship or under a liberal, pro-corporate, pro-war president? I think for most of us, the choice is distasteful but clear. Operating under fascism is not something that we want to do. Right? So I think, that those are the choices we're going to have to make. And I'll just say, remember the old curse, may you live under interesting times. Well, we are living that curse right now. We have, under this current period, we have a task in front of us. And I find that we should not just take the position of saying we support Biden. We should explain what kind of America we want and why we're opposed to Trump, and be building our base for progressive politics that will continue after the election and allow us some real choice. Thank you.
When workers' rights are under attack, what do? Stand up, fight back. When workers' rights are under attack, what do? Stand up, fight back. When women's rights are under attack, what do? Stand up, fight back. When abortion rights are under attack, what do? Stand up, fight back. When LGBT rights are under attack, what do? Stand up, fight back. Okay, our next speaker is Rosemary Freeland. She's the coordinator of the Women's Resource Center at Greenfield Community College, and she's a member of that institution's professional staff union's local chapter of the Massachusetts Teacher Association. She's going to speak of her personal experience organizing educator union activists at Greenfield Community College.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So, my name is Rosemary Freeland. I'm a lifelong resident of Greenfield, mother of 4 biracial children, aged 38 to 23. Former recipient of 1990s U.S. welfare programs, including aid to families with dependent children, food stamps, mass health, state and federal housing subsidy, and Pell Grants. How many of you ever considered Pell Grants as a welfare program? Think about it. I found my political activist voice in GCC Women's Studies, African American History, and Social Science classrooms, dismantling racism and white supremacist cultural workshops and seminars, in Elkwood, and in my Oak Quartz neighborhood here in Greenfield. All the fierce racial, economic, and gender justice warriors I met while parenting my children inform and anchor my present and ever-developing work as GCC Women's Resource Center coordinator. It also informs my own union activism in my chapter, the Greenfield Community College Professional Association. Today I'd like to share a moment in the history of GCC, a simple yet profound story of collective action in the face of repeated deception and secrecy, in the wake of an on-campus and off-campus reporting of the intentional suppression of a report by the GCC president, and resulting in harm to our college. Harm in particular inflicted on our staff, faculty, and students of color. The report I speak of was produced by an established race and equity and education consulting firm contracted by the GCC College Administration in the spring of 2023. Due to the time constraints and nuances involved in everything it takes to carry out a vote of no confidence in your president and provost, I ask you to and seek invite you to seek out news coverage of my union's votes of no confidence in the GCC president and the GCC provost. Votes of no confidence that resulted in large majorities of our members saying that we have no confidence in our current provost at about 96% of the vote, and of our current president, Michelle Shute, at about 86%. So publications, media outlets that you could look for more information would be the Shoestring, the Reporter, NEPM, WWLP, and the June 20th WHMP Talk the Talk podcast with Buzz Eisenberg and Bill Newman with our chapter president, Trevor Kearns. But back to the moment I want to highlight in this space. A snapshot, in time that demonstrates the necessity of collective, inspired, righteous, and just action in the face of oppressive, undemocratic decisions that undermine and besmirch the exceptional reputation and good, honest, always in the pursuit of education and engagement that GCC educators and students have come to love about GCC. Yesterday afternoon, GCC's 2024 licensed practical nurse student cohort participated in their traditional pinning ceremony. 24 GCC students. This particular 2024 cohort is comprised of 62.5% students of color. It's the most racially diverse program at GCC. 21 women and 3 men, co-parents, single father, students living in multi-generational households. In my capacity as resource coordinator, I've had the privilege and honor to get to know many of the LPN students since the fall of 2023, when they began their intensive 10-month journey, a journey that includes fulfilling clinical requirements in local hospitals and long-term care facilities. I am in awe of the sacrifice these students make in pursuit of their credential. Our healthcare system is better because of their personal commitment. You, all of you, will be fortunate to be cared for by any of these students. In the wake of the news of the suppressed report, at the start of this past week, this LPN cohort of 20 students delivered a petition to President Shute asking her not to attend their pinning ceremony. If she had decided to attend, they had committed to committing civil disobedience by walking across the stage, not shaking her hand, nor taking their portfolio from her. Michelle did listen and did not attend. So yesterday, she was not there. But those students were, and they were there, celebrated their accomplishments with their families and their children and their faculty. These students took time in the last week of an intensive, rigorous academic and clinical program to tell a leader that they did not condone her actions. They are my inspiration. So, quote Bell Hooks, what we do is more important than what we say or what we say we believe. Thank you.
Now I'm introducing Kevin Young, who teaches in the history department at UMass Amherst. He's active in the Faculty Librarian Union, which is MSB, in the Campus Environmental Social Action Movement, ESAM, and in Faculty for Justice in Palestine. He will speak about faculty and student protests against the war in Gaza and the implications for democracy.
Hi everyone, good to be here. I'm going to start my stopwatch. I have to go over. Most of my organizing in recent years has been on the college campus at UMass Amherst where I teach. So I'm going to speak a little bit about that and then sort of zoom out to the broader society. So I'm involved, like Ann said, with two groups in particular on campus. One is trying to push UMass to completely divest from all fossil fuels, not just the companies themselves, but also the financial institutions which enable them. And the second group I'm involved with, Faculty for Justice in Palestine, is, among other things, trying to get UMass to divest from war profiteers. So we all, I suspect, have heard the right's narrative about universities. And it usually goes like this. Campuses are these bastions of liberal or leftist indoctrination, wokeness and cancel culture, and they're run by faculty like me who are wildly out of touch with the sentiments of the majority of the US public. The reality, however, is that higher ed institutions, including UMass, are typically run undemocratically. They're ruled by boards of trustees, usually composed of corporate executives appointed by the governor, who in turn appoint administrators who serve wealthy donors, corporations, and the Pentagon. So in that sense, universities should really be the right's dream, shouldn't they? Part of those leaders' job is to systematically suppress democracy on campus. So on May 7th, Chancellor Javier Reyes at UMass sent in hundreds of police officers to violently arrest in many cases, over 130 students, employees, and community members. Whether we're talking about the fight against fossil fuels or against war, the key sentiments behind these progressive protest movements are shared by strong majorities of the general population. And this is true on both the UMass campus and among the general public. If we look at student opinion, student voters, 73% of them endorsed the call for divestment from weapons contractors. This was at UMass a couple months ago. At the level of the general public, we know that since October, a strong majority of the general public has supported a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. We know from polls going back further than that, that strong majorities of the public believe that the U.S. should obey international law, which, among other things, would entail ending the Israeli occupation and U.S. support for the occupation. The same is true of the environmental emergency, the right to abortion, contraception, so many other issues. On issue after issue, if you look at public opinion polls, most of the public is on our side. Yet we know from historical experience that having the majority of the public on your side is not enough. There are simply too many powerful forces arrayed against us on the other side. So if we look at the Supreme Court, Congress, the White House, how often have these institutions actually stood on the side of justice and equity? It wasn't the Supreme Court that ended slavery. It was an abolitionist movement that worked for decades through a variety of tactics to forcibly end slavery. With segregation, it wasn't the Supreme Court or Congress or the White House that ultimately ended segregation. It was a mass movement of people, black people in particular, of course, who caused disruption to the economy in the South and compelled the government to ultimately end segregation and much of the Jim Crow terror that went along with it. And, you know, we could say the same about other historical movement victories, which have come not through the goodwill of these institutions at the top of society, but from mass movements from below that employed civil disobedience, strikes, boycotts, sit-ins, and other disruptive tactics to force the government to fulfill its responsibility to the people. Today we face a difficult situation. On one hand, we have a neo-fascist right wing, which all of the previous speakers have talked about, that wants to roll back protections for people and for the environment, actually reverse much of the Enlightenment itself. And even more, what makes it even more urgent than prior moments of crisis, is that the right is also dedicated, through the burning of fossil fuels, to keeping us on a path that will literally make much of the planet uninhabitable. That's qualitatively different from any other crisis that humanity has faced, with the possible exception of nuclear weapons. So it's vitally important that we, of course, defeat the right whenever we can, keep these people out of government. Yet we also know that most Democratic Party leaders aren't too keen on democracy either. We have to face up to that. After all, it's President Biden who was supporting genocidal violence in Gaza. Closer to home, Governor Maura Healey, a liberal Democrat, who came out in support of the U.S. Chancellor after he deployed police to violently arrest peaceful protesters. So our historic imperative is not just to defeat the far right, which we absolutely have to do, but also to build a functioning democracy in this country, which we've never actually had. This has to start at the local level, in workplaces, in communities, in campuses, and it needs to continue regardless of what happens in November. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. Now we have our final speaker, Susan Triolo, who's a retired early childhood and elementary teacher, longtime anti-racist peace and justice activist with Western Mass Code Pink and FCCPR. She's the chair of the Sunderland Democratic Town Committee, and she's on our Reproductive Justice Task Force. She'll talk about how important local politics are in the fight to stop war on women and promote reproductive justice and democracy. She's going to suggest some things we can do to promote these values.
Save my time. Good afternoon. So glad you're here. Thanks for sweating it out with us. I have some good news. The Attorney General of the state of Massachusetts, Andrea Campbell, has now started the Reproductive Justice Unit of the Office of the Attorney General. There is a hotline if you need her for any kind of issues, including reproductive justice or any kind of racial inequality. The hotline is 617-963-2917. You can just go to mass.gov/AGO, Attorney General's office, and you'll find it. In Massachusetts, we have something called the SHIELD Law. The SHIELD Law in Massachusetts protects your right to access reproduction and sexual health care services, including abortion, gender-affirming care, and contraception, all protected by our Constitution and the laws of the Commonwealth. Something I learned this week at a conference: Mass Health and Medicaid in the state pays for abortion. It's very important that people know that. I didn't know that. How many people in here knew that? A few. Okay, so it's important to know that Mass Health will pay for abortions. I'm going to tell you now about some of the Massachusetts legislation that is in play that we need, either that is passed or that we need support for. Some of these are on your on the sheet that you got from Sharon on the way in. And if you want more of the details, you can let us know on the sign-in sheet, and I can send you copies of the details of these bills, because I'm just going to run through some of them. First of all is in the Senate, we have passed the Act relative to healthy youth, which provides a comprehensive sexual health education curriculum in schools. That includes notice to parents and a policy that will be printed annually so everybody knows what the sexual health education curriculum is, including sexual harassment. We've worked with the Amherst Young Feminist Party, formerly known as Generation Ratify, for several years. Give them a hand. We have a representative here, Marisol, and her dad, John Boniface. So that's very important that that's in existence. Other bills that are happening are an act relative to consumer health data protection. People can't get into your health education, your health information or mental health information without your consent. Just passed, is the act promoting access to midwifery care and out-of-hospital birth options, which means that this is for licensed midwifery care and creating more options for women to have their babies without having to go to the hospital, including at home. There's an act, and this is some things we need to work on. This is House Bill 1948, an act relative to paid pregnancy loss leave. If you have the misfortune of losing a child, you have the right to have time off work, paid time off work. Or this is what that bill is for. Okay, I'm going to have to skip some stuff here. Because what's at stake? What's at stake in this election? You've heard from 6 speakers about what's at stake in 2024. It's huge, and we know that. First, there's the election on November 5th between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. As you've heard, reproductive freedom and democracy are on the ballot at all levels. We cannot sit out this election. Reproductive care on all levels is on the ballot in Massachusetts and across the country. And Dave did a beautiful job of talking about how we can deal with our frustration and our disappointment, our everything about Joe Biden. We have a choice to make. Rather than support individual candidates or parties, we are asking you to consider donating to organizations like Movement Voter Project or Fair Fight or other community-based groups whose workers live and work on the ground in their communities, who know their neighbors, who know the relevant issues in their communities. We believe that's the best way to support progressive electoral issues that we care about. That's my 5 minutes, so I'm going to take another minute and talk about the down ballot issues. Because some people feel like we live in Massachusetts, it doesn't matter if we vote. Well, it matters. We're never going to tell young people your vote doesn't matter. Never. Down ballot issues, Senator Warren is up for re-election. Jim McGovern. They are threatened by huge right-wing dark money that's pouring into the state. There are 6 ballot issues that are now have been approved. There's one for raising tipped wage workers to $15. There's one, Pixie, for eliminating MCAS as a requirement for high school graduation. Some FCCPR people have worked very hard on that. There's 2 initiatives on ride sharing, like Lyft and Uber. Check it out, figure out the one that works for you. There's a mandate for an annual audit from the state legislature, and there's a ballot question to legalize psychedelics. I think we all need some. I think it's fair to say that we're all worried about the outcome of this election. Our country is at risk no matter what the outcome. There's a serious threat to our democracy no matter how flawed is our democracy. There is no doubt, whatever the outcome of the election, your choice to have children or not have children hangs in the balance and is on the ballot in 2024. Whatever the outcome, the future of the United States Supreme Court hangs in the balance. We need to think well about the outcome we want for ourselves, our future, and our planet. And we need to vote, and we need to vote this year. Don't sit it out. Last comment, voter registration is super easy. You can do it online, you can do it by mail, you can do it in person, on your phone or other device. Go to Massachusetts Secretary of State. Voter registration will pop up. You can register or check your registration. If you have moved, you must change your registration. And importantly, young people who will be 18 by November 5th are eligible to register. Everyone must be registered in the state 10 days ahead of the election. Last comment, I want to tell you about Loretta Ross, who I got to see this week. And Loretta Ross finished her comments with, I see liberation in the future. I see it in the distance. Why? Because we have truth, We have science, we have facts, and we have each other. Thank you for coming.